Sometimes rare, traumatic, or shocking events become emblazoned into one's memory. In 1946, I witnessed a prophetic utterance made by George Albert Smith, prophet and president of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints from 1945 to 1951. President Smith said, "I have had a troublesome vision of another great and terrible war that made the war just ended look like a training exercise, World War II, and people died like flies. It began at a time when the Soviet Union's military might dwarf that of the United States, and we, that is, the United States, would have missiles in Europe that carried an atomic bomb. I saw the United States withdraw its missiles to appease the Soviet Union, and then the war began." He also said that we would have big missiles in deep holes, he described like grain silos, which the Soviets would try to destroy with their own missiles. They would hit military installations and some cities also. He said that the president at that time would be a man of a different extraction. Until then, all the presidents would be of British or Northern European ancestry. He continued that the United States would be bound by numerous entangling alliances and would take away weapons owned by the people. He talked some about the initial attack and the ground warfare, but I can't remember enough to document all their tactics and in which countries various things occurred. One tactic, especially in Europe, was to transport tanks in thousands of big trucks, like semi-trailers on the superhighways, to have them located where they wanted them when the war was to begin. During that explanation I asked, "What about the atomic cannon?" To which he answered, "I didn't see anything like that." Then he said, "The aftermath was dreadful. Think of the worst, most difficult times of the Depression." He turned to us children and said, "You won't remember the Depression," which was true. I didn't know there was a depression. As I was growing up, the sun came up every morning, flowers bloomed, we went to school, and there was church every Sunday. But he repeated to our parents, "Think of the worst condition of the Depression. Can you think of something?" Our father answered, "Oh yes." Then President Smith continued, "You know how Sunday school picnics are complete with salad, chicken, root beer, and dessert, and everyone has a wonderful time. The worst time of the Depression will seem like a Sunday school picnic when compared with conditions that will exist after that great war." When he finished speaking, he turned around and went to the front door. As he left, I thought to myself, what he said is really important. I've got to remember it. To understand President George Albert Smith's woeful statement, "I have had a troublesome vision," one first must comprehend the kind of man President Smith was. Those who knew him best describe him as the most humble, compassionate, magnanimous, kind, and merciful person they knew. He exemplified the pure love of Christ and showed his love for all of God's children by his unqualified service. For example, at the end of World War II, he organized a relief program for war-torn Europe's destitute people. The Relief Society sisters made quilts and clothes. The church welfare cannery produced millions of cases of food donated from farms and home gardens. Other materials and food were purchased from donations by church members worldwide. Then he got President Truman's permission to send the aid and assigned Elder Ezra Taft Benson to administer its distribution in Europe. The aid was not restricted to LDS church members. The government of Greece honored President Smith for his and the church's service to its people. Thereafter, the government initiated the Marshall Plan and organizations like CARE sprang up. Thus, for him to see an event of which he also said in his April 1950 General Conference concluding speech, "People by the millions will die like flies," indeed must have been a troublesome vision. When President Smith told us of his vision, the United States and the USSR were allies. Some tiffs had occurred between the USSR and the United States, but the idea that the Soviets would become an enemy wasn't popular. In 1946, the United States was the world's great military power. It seems the allies of the United States succeeded in World War II because we had sent them material. The idea that the USSR would dwarf the military might of the United States was contrary to any reasonable expectation. But today, it is exactly true. The Soviets' military might is awesome, Nearly all their population, including peasant farmers, serve in their reserves and may become part of their army in time of war. They have amassed a year's supply of food, so they will not have to farm during the first year of any war. They have about 5 times as many fighters and several times as many aircraft as we do. They are well-made, effective aircraft with well-trained pilots and crews. Their infantry's weapons and logistics preparations are staggering. Thus, 2 elements of President Smith's vision were exactly correct. The USSR became our enemy, and their military might dwarfs our own. It's no secret that we have nuclear warhead missiles in Europe and in underground silos here. But in 1946, nuclear missiles were beyond imagination. Even the president of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology said in 1950, "Intercontinental ballistic missiles with nuclear warheads are impossible." But we had them by 1963. I've worked in Minuteman missile silos, which accurately fit President Smith's description. But our cruise missiles were made after 1980. General Bernard Rogers, NATO commander, was so outspoken against the INF Treaty that he was removed. General John Gavin, his successor, said that he could not maintain Europe in a war for more than 2 weeks without nuclear weapons. So 5 more elements of President Smith's vision are verified. We have missiles in Europe and in silos that carry atomic bombs and are essential for United States defense. Next, President Smith said that we would withdraw our missiles from Europe to appease the Soviets. Former UN Ambassador Jeane Kirkpatrick said that the INF Treaty hurts us militarily, but we have to do it. Eugene Callens says the treaty was politically motivated. Missiles were used as bargaining chips in negotiations with the Soviets, which is a form of appeasement, and President Reagan may have been buying time with their removal until other new systems were in place. During the negotiations, we revealed that we knew the USSR plans to violate the treaty. Thus, 2 more elements of President Smith's vision are verified. On the 1st of September 1988, the United States began removing missiles to comply with a treaty designed to appease the Soviets. By the 31st of December 1989, our missiles should be disarmed. Just before President Smith visited us, the newspaper headlined a giant about 24-wheel artillery piece named the atomic cannon. It was to have been like Big Bertha, which Germany used to batter Liege, Namur, and Paris. The atomic cannon was designed to fire atomic bombs 100 miles to assure no potential aggressor ever would start another war. But President Smith said he did not see anything like that. History reveals that the atomic cannon was a flop, and by about 1948 the program was canceled. The United States has a howitzer able to fire a nuclear weapon about 20 miles. But it is very different from the Colossus shown in the news. Thus, another element of President Smith's prophecy is verified. As predicted, all United States presidents have had North European or British ancestry. But in 1988, a man of Greek descent led the polls for a time. He may run again. Thus, 1 more element of President Smith's vision is realized. We see how another element could occur. The next elements in President Smith's prophecy were another great and terrible war that would make World War II look like a training exercise, and that people would die like flies. This obviously hasn't happened, but consider some of the Soviets' weapons and military preparations and the results of their use. The Soviets have y2meta megaton hydrogen bombs, which could be used against military bases and cities. Also, when the Soviets tested one of their first y2meta megaton bombs, the electromagnetic pulse, which is an incredibly high-energy radio wave produced by the detonation, melted an electrical system power transformer's windings 190 miles away. The Soviets are far ahead of the United States in space technology and the number of satellites in orbit. From January through September 1987, the Soviets fired more than 700 vehicles into space, mostly military. The United States space program for that same time was almost stopped. And certain military analysts believe that some of the Soviet satellites in orbit above the United States contain high-yield nuclear bombs purposely to destroy all the transformers in our nationwide power grid computers, radios, televisions, telephones, and most other electronic devices. Pacemakers and electronic watches may be blown out, too. Most transistors, diodes, integrated circuits, and other semiconductor devices can tolerate less than 30 volts. Evacuation from cities before the bombs hit may be difficult because later model vehicle engines and alternators today have semiconductor controls. Their junctions could be melted in a millionth of a second by the electromagnetic pulse. It may be as if for an instant the entire continent were a microwave oven. Older vehicles with points in their distributors and mechanical voltage regulators may continue to operate if their alternator diodes are not blown. Diodes and electronic auto parts can be replaced if spares exist that were shielded. My amateur radio gear with electron tubes still may work afterward. But well pumps that supply our drinking water may be out of service for a long time. In about 1940, my parents started a Sunday evening study group, which their friend Sidney Sperry taught. About 1964, while studying the Doctrine and Covenants, Sperry noted that Section 117 said a calamity would come upon the children of men. He told us of an experience he had with President George Albert Smith at the end of a general conference. Sperry said, "I rushed up onto the platform to speak with President Smith after the prayer. When I arrived at his side, he was standing overlooking the congregation. The people were just starting to stand up, and the ushers were opening the doors so everyone could leave. And I heard the president woefully mutter as he looked over the congregation, 'They'll die like flies.'" Sperry explained his concern that President Smith looked at the saints and said, "They'll die like flies." Neither my father, mother, nor I said anything to the group about what President Smith had told us in our home. Knowing that President Smith considered that saints would be among those whom he told us would die like flies greatly concerned me, too. For I am one of them and was in the tabernacle when that occurred. I saw Sperry rush up to the speaker's platform at the end of conference. Perhaps I feel like Laman felt about the Jews at Jerusalem being righteous, that many saints are honorable, diligent in the Lord's work, and doers of the word, not hearers only. Yet I know President Benson has said that the revelation on the production and storage of food may be as important to our temporal salvation as it was for Noah to get into the ark. And few have complied with this counsel of the Lord's living prophet. Remember that the Lord said, "If ye are prepared, ye shall not fear." Ancient prophets knew our day would be difficult, yet yearned to see it. The saints are commanded to obey and teach the Lord's laws, to multiply and fill the earth, and to build the Lord's kingdom. Our task is not to shrink, but to prepare for challenges that may demand our greatest efforts to survive free from AIDS or the plagues that otherwise might infect everyone. On the 18th of December, Hugh Nibley said his mother, a close friend of President Smith, told him about the vision that President Smith received. Sister Nibley heard the prophet relate this story at a conference in the Bay Area. Nibley also said he was close to Legrand Richards' family, and Sister Richards told him about the vision as well.